Hello, and welcome to this Gungeon video on miscellaneous unused content. This is going to be a bit different. I'm trying out actually voicing the video for once, just to see how it goes, see how it's received, see how it fits together. I also have changed the background that I'll be showing unused content against for better contrast, and we'll see where we go from there. This video is not going to follow any theme, it's just going to be a whole collection of unused scraps that I've found. To be honest, it almost feels like my videos are in a race with the unused content page on the wiki to see who can get to what first, because I was the first to the bunker mimic, whereas they were the first to the shopkeeper mimic. The first thing I want to show you are these map icons for the cosmonaut and the ninja. I'm not sure when these were added into the files, whether they've been there all along or have only been there since AG&D, but the point stands that they are in the files. The cosmonaut and ninja just don't pull from them when they bring up the map. Anyways, moving on, you may remember this grey cultist from my video on the cosmonaut. If you enter a boss room as the cosmonaut, instead of having the image of the player, the cosmonaut in that case, you get this image of the cultist, except wearing grey robes. And I'm pretty sure this is a glitch. Well, that is a glitch anyway when it happens. It must be pulling from the sprites, and possibly this is a default. But I also found this grey version of the cultist's map icon, which would have probably gone with this grey version of the cultist. My best guess is that the cultist was originally supposed to have grey robes, but they changed it to a more pinkish purple to suit his personality. Hey, so, me from the future here, interjecting, like I'm recording this after the main bit, just to point out that there are a couple things in this segment that I forgot during the initial recording. The first one is this, Lamie's alternate skin. I neglected to mention this in the video, including Lamie, because I didn't have any high-quality images of it, but now I actually have the sprite files for it. I can show it to you here. She appears to be wearing a red shirt, blue hair with a pink visor. Very futuristic. Next up we have these sprites for what appears to be the cosmonaut inflating like a balloon. I have no idea where these would have been used. I don't even know if these are used. Like, I don't know enough about the cosmonaut to know if these are used or if they're unused. Point is, there are sprites for the cosmonaut inflating. Finally, in the character segment, this isn't really a revelation, but I actually managed to get my hands on the sprite sheet for the shell itself so I can show you some shell sprites without, you know, the terrible quality. You can see down at the bottom that when he's shot with the clock hair, he actually explodes like the bullet does. First up in the enemies category, we have this weird brick cube. I have no idea what this is supposed to be. I found it in the files after the AG&D update. My best guess would have to be that it would behave like one of the lead cubes or the mountain cubes, except it has no real face, unless you want to count those weird black markings on the front of it as an adorable hidden face. I asked around, and some people's best suggestions were that it may have been an unused initial design for the wall mimic. Next up, we have this unused Ammonomicon entry for an enemy called the Gurpy, based off the Harpy. Gurpy, familiar face. A guardian of bullet hell, will viciously attack any mortal being that passes to the 6th chamber. Though few witnesses survive, it is known to wear the face of its prey. Strike when it alights. That last part makes me think that the Gurpy may have been invincible most of the time, only vulnerable to damage when it opened up or something, or alights, as this Ammonomicon entry says. Moving on to another unused Ammonomicon entry, we have the Bullet Hornet, Sting of Defeat. A gargantuan insect that has evolved a projectile sting. Unfortunately, it can sting more than once before dying. I don't quite know what to make of this, so I'll leave speculation up to you. Another unused Ammonomicon entry. Dreadbook, Klaatu Beretta Nikto. Once the Ammonomicon of a fallen Gungeoneer, this tome has been inked in gun grease and rebound in gun-dead flesh. The phrase Klaatu Beretta Nikto appears to be a reference to the phrase Klaatu Barada Nikto from the 1951 science fiction film The Day the Earth Stood Still. The line is given to the robot Gort to make him relent from destroying the Earth and resurrect the character Klaatu from death. I'm not quite sure what this actually has to do with the Dread Book. My best speculation is that the Dread Book would have been something similar to the booklet. The final unused Ammonomicon entry we'll be looking at is this thing for the Snake Shooter. Sheds shells. The spawn of the great Amaconda, each snake shooter will shed its shells thousands of times before maturing. Very few survive to adulthood. On the wiki, it speculates that the snake shooter may be the spheres that the Amaconda spawns during its boss fight. I don't necessarily think that's the case, because the sprites for those call them super balls. But, then again, the sprites for many things call them by incorrect names, so I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Moving on, there's actually an unused Ammonomicon entry for the bunker. Bunker, fortified position. This bunker's walls are several feet thick, and it is too dark to make out what is operating its turrets. It seems like something is moving inside. And in the top left there, I found the unused Ammonomicon image for Bunker. This is what you'd click on to bring up the main page on the right. All the bosses in the game have this weird simplified image of themselves to bring up the main article, as opposed to enemies, which actually just have an image of themselves. There is actually also an unused Ammonomicon entry for the Bunker Mimic boss. However, it is exactly the same as Bunker's. This makes me think that they just copy and pasted Bunker's Ammonomicon entry with the intention to change it later, and never did. But, I suppose that's interesting. There is also an unused Ammonomicon entry for the Bullet Bishop, who I showed in a video way back. Bullet Bishop, ex cathedra. This blessed bullet speaks with the voice of Caliber herself. His aim is infallible, at least when firing from the pulpit. And speaking of the Bullet Bishop, there are these sprites that I've found called Incense Teleports. They are stored with the Bullet Bishop, which implies that the Bullet Bishop would have had the ability to teleport around in puffs of incense during his fight. That's really all we know about his attack patterns. Speaking of unused teleporting bosses, the Vampire Mantis, called the Psychomant in the files, does have an animation for teleporting by turning into a swirl of bats. Again, this suggests that he would teleport around his boss room during the fight, and again, that's all we know about his attack patterns. Finally, in this enemies category, I want to go over the unused Ammonomicon entries for the Pedestal Mimic and the Wall Mimic. Pedestal Mimic. Altered Appearance. A mimic that has learned to change its form even further than most. Preys on adventurers weakened by encounters with other, substantially stronger foes. And Wall Mimic. Break in the wall. A few steps down the Mimic evolutionary line, the Wall Mimic can camouflage itself against almost any surface in the Gungeon. Their infrequent but surprising appearance can drive novice Gungeoneers up the wall. Moving on from enemies, I want to talk about these sprites that I found for something called Alarm Mushrooms. These Alarm Mushroom sprites are stored in the same location as the files for the mines, meaning that if they were in the game, they'd probably be used in the mines. There are red and green versions. I can't tell quite what the green versions are supposed to be, but as you can see on the left, the red versions appear to be some sort of rotating spotlight. These mushrooms may be a reference to the Shrieker fungus from D&D, a mushroom that lets out a shriek if anything comes near, though I'm not 100% sure on that. There are sprites for the red alarm mushroom both being in an idle mode and while being broken. However, there are neither of those for the green version. Hello, me from the future here again. I did a bit more research and I learned that Dodge Roll Brent, one of the developers of the game, had actually mentioned alarm mushrooms in the Enter the Gungeon Discord server. Basically, someone asked him what they were, and his only response was a trap that sucked to play against. So, alarm mushrooms would have been a trap in the mines, but they were cut because they weren't fun, basically. We still don't know how they would have been a trap, though, how they would have behaved. Next up, there's these weird sprites for the Muncher. I've heard some people call these Muncher mimics, but that doesn't make much sense, especially when you consider that the sprites for this are called Muncher Talk. This implies that at some point you were supposed to be able to actually communicate with the Muncher. More than just shoving a gun in its mouth, I mean. That sounds really dark, out of context. Anyways, moving on, we have these frozen robot sprites from the collection for the Hollow. Now, I'm not sure what these would have been used for, but as you can tell, on the right here we have the robot that we know and love today, and on the left we have some weird other robot. It's possible that the robot on the left was supposed to be an original design for the robot, and that these chunks of ice were tied into some sort of unused robot unlocking quest or mechanism. Less remarkable than most, we have the ooze tank. Now, the sprites for the ooze tank are stored in the same collection that holds the Marine's past. I doubt that the ooze tank would have functioned any different to poison barrels within the Gungeon, but this makes me think that the Marine's past may have originally been intended to have ooze tanks as part of its design, possibly as a way of beating the boss. Now, these weird images of the robot, pilot, and convict are actually stored with the images of the decoy. They're also called robot decoy, rogue decoy, and convict decoy. But this makes me think that originally the decoy was supposed to actually create a decoy version of the actual player character, and not just a wooden humanoid. Now, I couldn't find any decoy sprites for the Hunter, Marine, or Bullet, but strangely enough, I could find one for the Cosmonaut. I don't know why, out of all characters, the Cosmonaut has one, along with the other three, and not the Marine or Hunter? I guess we'll never know. Alright, approaching the end now, we have these three caches. As far as I know, these aren't used in the game. The Key Bullet cache, Money cache, and Money Plus cache. Now you've got to remember, in the game's development and files, keys were called Key Bullets, which is why Key Bulletkin are called Key Bulletkin. This makes me think that the Key Bullet cache would have been a rare drop, which would have just given you a bunch of keys. From this, I'm going to infer that the Money cache would have just given you a lot of money, and that the Money Plus cache would have given you even more money. I don't know. I would assume that the Money cache and Money Plus caches were cut because you can occasionally find a 50 shell drop, which probably would have replaced their purpose anyway. Second to last, we have this fellow, called Pro Tip Bip in the files. Now, you've probably never heard of or seen Pro Tip Bip, mainly because he's no longer used, but he was used in the game's pre-alpha, where he would appear on loading screens to give you tips for the game, such as, you can avoid most damage with a perfectly timed dodge roll. Rolling is critical to survival. Remember, you are briefly invulnerable during dodge rolls. Time it well to avoid damage. You can flip tables to create cover. Watch out though, some enemies may do the same. And you can cross short pits by dodge rolling over them. He was likely cut when they added the Sir Manual tutorial, because then he was no longer needed. Finally, we have these weird lines of dialogue from an NPC called the Shopkeeper Mimic. Purchase my wares. Buy my goods. Special price today only. I don't know what these were supposed to be for. Presumably a mimic that would replace Bello or some other shopkeeper at some point in the game. However, there is another line of dialogue associated with the Shopkeeper Mimic that I don't think was supposed to come from the mimic itself. Well, I thought I was done for. You gotta watch out for mimics. They could be anything. Even you. You should go. I think this is supposed to be a line of dialogue from whatever shopkeeper was saved. Namely, Bello, if we're going off the theory that it was Bello. Anyways, this has been my attempt at a voiced version of these videos. I hope my voice wasn't too annoying. I really don't like it. I hope the recording was okay as well, because sometimes it can be a bit worse when it goes to the recording. I also tend to be rambling, but I won't go off on a tangent of how terrible I am. I'll leave you with this information. Honestly, it's really, really fun to make these. I've done almost nothing these past few days but make cut content Gungeon videos, and it has been an awesome experience, mainly seeing the feedback from all of you. Like, the little theories that you make, and the little ideas. It's an incredible thing. But anyways, I'll cut this here. See ya!